escalation of symptoms. And although we know this syndrome called long COVID, and we're only beginning to recognize long vax, I will tell you that is what my practice specializes in. Those are new terms for an old syndrome. What we're seeing is an epidemic of a disease that has long been called myalgic encephalitis / chronic fatigue syndrome. There's 3 pillars to that diagnosis, and they're all clinical. There are no tests for this syndrome, but it's patients who present with this constellation of fatigue, post-exertional malaise, and some sort of cognitive dysfunction that we sometimes use brain fog. That's not the only thing, the 3 things they come with, but those are generally present in any patient who comes to see me. They have a whole side menu, a side list of other symptoms from sensory neuropathies, motor neuropathies, cranial symptoms, headache syndromes, tinnitus, vertigo, inflammatory syndromes, but the core is that. And the Mayo Clinic called that out in 2021 in regards to COVID, that they were seeing unprecedented rates of ME/CFS. Historically, ME/CFS has always been associated with infections. Most common is EBV or mono. Lyme disease can do it, mycoplasma can do it, but with COVID, it's immense. And here's what I want to tell you, that in my practice, we treat long COVID and long vax. 70% of the patients in my practice became ill after the vaccine. They are long vax. The vast majority of what this rest of science in this country is calling long COVID is actually long vax. And how do I know the difference? Very easy. It's called temporal association. If someone's symptoms present within days to weeks of COVID, long COVID. If it presents within days to weeks or sometimes minutes to hours of the vaccine, it's long vax. It's not that complicated to know what the trigger was. And they both share pathogenic insults, which is this spike protein. And the sadness, and I'll try to wrap up because I don't want to go too long, but the sadness is in my first year in practice, I think the value that I brought to the patients is I listened to them. They understood that I understood them. I wasn't gaslighting them. I knew what was wrong with them, or I knew what caused their illness, and I was willing to try to treat it. 3.5 years later, I think the value I bring is immense clinical experience using a diversity of therapies where I've been able to mitigate much of their suffering and return quite a bit of functioning. Many of them became disabled. And when I say that is so many of my patients, when you take their history prior to their illness, they will report that they ate well. They were absolutely successful in their careers. They liked to exercise and stay fit. They were raising their children. And now they found themselves barely able to get out of bed in some cases. Or if they do, they immediately get fatigued and they're back in their house, and a lot of them are housebound. They cannot work anymore. They become financially unhealthy. So the amount of ways in which they get sick is immeasurable. It's not only physical, it's financial, it's sexual, like with their relationships, it's occupational, they can't work. And so I see these multiply disabled patients who are really enjoying like the peak of their lives and now are decimated. And it's an endless sadness, but I'm very proud of the work I've done with myself and my colleagues. We've helped innumerable of them, but it is the most complex and idiosyncratic disease that I've ever encountered, and I hope to continue that work. And so I want to second that call that Dr. Ladapo just made, is that I've been doing this like hook and the crook, like a gumshoe detective trying to figure out how to help these patients. But I'd love for the government to back us up and find really good research that can help understand the disease better, select therapies better, in order to mitigate the immense suffering that I see on a daily basis. So again, I'm really appreciative and grateful that you asked me to come, Joe. Dr. Walskog. Oh, I'm supposed to introduce my colleague, Dr. Walskog. He's been a longtime friend and colleague now. We met in COVID. We both worked in Wisconsin together, and just as I talked about my experiences, I will say that Dr. Walskog, he's been involved in really attending to supporting the vaccine injured, not only promoting research, but also financial support. In fact, part of your early fundraising was devoted to paying for the care of many of the vaccine injured, and he's since gone on to do lots more things and working on changing policy. And so I appreciate his organization that he co-founded, which is React 19, and everything that they're doing. And so welcome to Dr. Joel Walskog.
Thank you, Pierre. And thank you, Dr. Ladapo, for the invitation to speak today at the press conference here to discuss the removal of the COVID-19 shots in pregnant women and from the childhood immunization schedule here in the United States. Let me be clear. The COVID shots should have never been authorized in children and pregnant women, even in emergency use. As a physician, as a person who sustained an adverse event to the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, or I should say shot, and as co-chairman of React 19, which represents almost 40,000 Americans, I am hopeful that I can provide you all with some unique perspectives in the development and the safety of the COVID shots. I enjoyed a successful orthopedic practice in Wisconsin for 19 years. On December 30th of 2020, I received my one and only Moderna shot. Within 1 week after this injection, I developed problems with my legs, including weakness, numbness, and loss of balance, leading to numerous falls. I was diagnosed with transverse myelitis. All my providers did not even recognize the association of the injection. Since my original diagnosis, I've also been diagnosed with autonomic dysfunction and an unspecified immune disorder. I was forced to medically retire. I am now co-chair of React 19, which is a science-based, non-political, nonprofit organization that represents Americans seriously injured by the COVID-19 shots. Our mission is to provide the injured community with financial, physical, and emotional support. I am here today to express my profound concerns regarding the development and safety of the COVID-19 shots, particularly in children and pregnant women. In 2021, the American public was reassured that the clinical trials were rigorous, with required oversight by our federal health regulatory agencies. We were also reassured that the rollout of the shots was carefully managed. We were repeatedly told the shots were safe. Growing evidence paints quite a different story. The process was undoubtedly rushed. Safety data was withheld or in certain instances altered. Maddie DeGarry, many of you may know her story. She was injured during the phase 3 Pfizer trial. She was 14. That was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. She's 17 now, still in a wheelchair and using a feeding tube for nutrition. She has been gaslit by almost all of her providers in Ohio, and she's currently actually up in Jacksonville rehabilitating through the Ronald McDonald House. If you review that phase 3 clinical trial data about Maddie, her symptoms are basically reduced to a stomachache. And of course, not related to her Pfizer injection that received as part of the phase 3 clinical trial. Reporting systems such as VAERS and vSafe have been dismal failures. Are such reporting systems deficient by design, is one of my questions. Are regulatory agencies such as the FDA publicly supported and openly promoted the experimental countermeasures in an obvious conflict of interest to its mission to protect Americans from drugs and medical devices? Regulatory norms were ignored. Instead of requiring pharmaceutical companies to prove the product was safe and effective, the COVID-19s were assumed to be safe and effective, with follow-up data sometimes as short as 2 weeks. These products were given to pregnant and lactating women, as well as children, with no long-term safety data. This decision to do that is counter to hundreds of years of medical dictum not to use experimental products in pregnant and lactating women and in children. I say all this to you today not to relive the past. I choose instead to admit the things we could have done better. I choose to focus on science and not polarizing, rhetoric. In React 19, we often say we've had negative reactions, but we seek positive actions. Science is rarely settled. Scientific conclusions can be changed with new information. I am certainly glad and appreciative that the COVID-19 shots have been removed from the childhood vaccination schedule for healthy children. This decision in healthy children and pregnant women will undoubtedly reduce future injury to these populations. However, much damage has already been done. There are countless children and adults who have been injured by the COVID-19 shots. As Americans, we need to recognize our fellow citizens injured by the COVID-19 shots in a non-judgmental fashion. They need acknowledgement, research, medical care, as well as fair and just compensation. I will not stop until we achieve these humanitarian goals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Walskog. Okay, well, we'll take a few questions. Anyone who has questions for Dr. Corey, Dr. Walskog, or myself?
Was one vaccine worse than another? And what's the future for people who are already taking vaccine? Is there a problem as they go with their lives?
Yeah, great, very important questions. So first of all, multiple studies now, to be very clear, multiple studies now show that of the two, Moderna and Pfizer, Pfizer is definitely worse. Pfizer is worse for cardiovascular side effects related to blood clotting. Pfizer is worse for neurologic effects, and Pfizer is worse for serious adverse events overall. A few studies have shown that Pfizer may be associated with an increase in mortality also compared to Moderna. The vaccines, they are not the same. You've heard my opinion, Dr. Corey's, Dr. Walskog's opinions about their use in general, but between the two of them, Pfizer is definitely worse. You've got probably more myocarditis cases with Moderna, but Pfizer is worse overall. And then, the second question you asked is a really good one. Another doctor that I think probably all of us admire, a doctor named Dr. Mary Bowden in Texas, she's been writing a bit about how she's been testing antibody levels. And what she's finding is that levels of antibody to spike protein for people who have been vaccinated, who are her patients, they remain elevated for long periods of time. And that's not normal. That's completely abnormal. So this is just part of the reason why we absolutely need more infrastructure in this area, more scientific infrastructure, more funding to support the patients and the physicians and the scientists who can help us understand what the long-term impacts are for all populations who've received these products. Any other questions? Yeah.
Quick question. So can you speak a little bit to the determination to remove it from the vaccine schedule for healthy children versus the verbiage of saying for all children?
Yeah, I hope that we get there. Obviously, there's a difference, and I hope that we get there because these products, they should not be used in any human beings, and there's some people who are trying to put them in animals too, and I think many of us wouldn't want to eat that food either, that meat.
Sort of along those lines, what's your recommendation for the older population if they're weighing whether or not they should take them?
Okay, yeah, so I apologize that it hasn't been clear. They shouldn't take them. They are products that should not be going into human beings. And in terms of alternatives for individuals who are still concerned, there are a few things to recognize. First of all, you should know that there is a lot of evidence from different studies in different groups that show that the people who receive these vaccines, including older people, eventually become at increased risk of contracting COVID-19. So there's a negative effect or negative efficacy, or negative effectiveness associated with them. Second, there are treatments. The treatments aren't fantastic, but there are treatments. There's a drug that Merck makes. There's a drug that Pfizer makes called Paxlovid. There's actually another outpatient option too that's IV. And for prevention, there's actually a monoclonal antibody that's been approved by the FDA. So it essentially functions similar to a vaccine that people can take it. It's every 6 or 12 months or so. So there are options for people beyond that.
In your opinion, should the adjectives healthy and young, should those be dropped from the guidelines then? It should just be universal for everyone?
Yeah, so actually that brings me to the third point that I mentioned before. So at this point, literally every walking human being, every adult, has had COVID-19 before. And the risk of an adverse outcome for someone who's had COVID-19 is extremely low. So we are in the area for certainly for young people, of something that is comparable to, to the cold, right, to rhinovirus. People can still get sick, but in terms of actual major health impacts, for almost virtually all young people and virtually all healthy people who've had this before, it's really not something that it should be elevated to the level of other conditions that we have more concern about. And then the other thing, again, to mention is that increasingly it appears that the folks who have received these vaccines, particularly when they've been boosted, and particularly when they continue to be boosted, appear to actually be at highest risk of becoming seriously ill from the virus. Great. Okay, go ahead, sir.
What level of optimism are you at when it comes to, we'll figure this out, we'll get safe vaccines, maybe no vaccines? Like, how do you feel about that in the future going forward?
Am I an optimistic person? I'm not sure. I generally think that, I wouldn't even call it optimism. Optimism's not wrong word. I am confident that things are gonna get better. What I don't know is the time, how long it's gonna take, what the timeline is, but I'm very confident that things are gonna get better. And it's really up to us to keep doing what we're doing here today, what these guys have been doing for years, and what other people who have been courageous and really stood with the truth, however uncomfortable it was. So with all of that, we're gonna keep going in the right direction. The more of us that do it, the faster we'll get there. All right, thank you guys very much. Okay, thanks guys. Thank you so much.